It is Saturday afternoon. It's May the 2nd, and it's the day when the governor reopened the county parks. They reopened today. State parks reopened today. Golf courses reopened today. Down by us, we saw a lot of people out there in their boats, and we did just a little bit of fishing today off a dock. Didn't catch anything, but it was fun being outside, and I'm glad to be here with you today. So I want to tell you a little story, hey Liz, about God's provision and how miraculous it is and how marvelous it is, and how we don't always see that God has a plan that's like a thread running through our lives, and then eventually we see how it all fits together. But none of it catches God by surprise. Hey Lee. So I want to tell you a story that's spread out over several chapters in the book of 2 Kings. In 2 Kings, we have the story of the prophet Elisha. And in chapter 4, Elisha is passing through a town called Shunem. And there's a lady there that lives in Shunem, and she makes some bread and gives it to Elisha. But she realizes he's a man of God, so she doesn't want to just have one encounter with him. She wants to have a relationship with him. She believes she'll be blessed by having a relationship with him. Hey, Jay. And so she makes a little room in her house. She convinces her husband to make a little room in their house so that every time Elisha comes through Shunem, he can come to their house, stay there, have a place, have a meal, and so forth. And at some point, Elisha goes to the woman and says, "You've been very kind to me, and I'd like to do something for you. What do you want?" And she says, "I would like a child. I haven't been able to bear a child." So Elisha prophesies over her that she will have a son, and indeed she does. Then it fast forwards a little bit. All of a sudden in verse 18, the child is fully grown, and he's out in the fields working with his father. And he gets stricken with something. He says to his father, my head, and they take the child home, and he dies. And this Shunammite woman says, "Go get the man of God." And so they send for Elisha, and they bring him to the house. And he basically gives the boy, who's dead, by the way, mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, lays on top of him, and brings him back to life again. So even that chapter by itself would be just a phenomenal story of God's provision. He provided that the woman would have a son, and then he provided that the son would live despite the tragedy he went through. But that's not the end of the story. That's the amazing thing. So if you read a few chapters further, then in chapter 8, Elisha, it says, calls for the woman whose son had been restored to life. And he basically says to her, look, you need to leave this area because there's going to be a famine here for 7 years. And so she does. She leaves the area and she goes to the land of the Philistines, and she stays there while the famine is in her land. Then the famine is over, so she returns back home. Well, while she was gone, guess what? Somebody else moved in and took over her family's land. So the only way she can get her land back is to go to the king. And she goes to the king. And while she goes in to see the king, Elisha's servant, a man named Gehazi, is in there talking to the king about how wonderful Elisha is. And the king says, tell me all the great things Elisha has done. And Gehazi starts to tell the story about how Elisha brought this woman's son back to life. And at that exact moment, the woman walks in to see the king about her land dispute. And Gehazi says, there is the woman, and there's her son with her that Elisha restored to life. And so the king immediately says, well, what's the deal? And she needs her land back. And he says, give her land back. Now, my point is simply this. Don't you think that from the very beginning, God already knew what was going to happen with the famine, with her returning from the famine, with her going in to see the king? with Gehazi being there at that exact same moment, telling the king about Elisha bringing this woman's child back to life. So there are no coincidences with God. He has a complete plan for our lives, and all the pieces are perfectly falling into place over time. We just don't realize it a lot of times. Sometimes we wonder, what the heck's going on? Where are you, God? I think that when this woman got her son, when she originally is told by Elisha that she's going to have a son, she says, don't lie to me. He says, I'm not lying. You're going to have a son. Then when she has the son and then he dies, she must be thinking, God, what's the deal? You gave me my son, the man of God prophesied, I got my son, and now he's gone? No, he's not gone. Elisha brings him back to life. Then she loses all her land. What's she supposed to do? Go see the king. God has made sure that Gehazi is there at that exact moment, telling the king about the miracle resurrection of her son. Everything falling into place perfectly, because God has a plan and a design for each of our lives, just like he did for this woman of the town of Shuman. So I want to tell you about a song that I want to do, and a little controversy about this song when it first came out. The song is called Reckless Love, and it talks about the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. And some people got upset at that lyric when it first came out. They said, God is not reckless. And I would say that is absolutely true. God is not reckless. He is very sovereign. He knows exactly what he's doing at all times. But to us who are experiencing God's miraculous, marvelous love, sometimes it feels like he just went out of his way to do something amazing and incredible that from our perspective would seem reckless. Like, wow, God, how did you put all these pieces together? This is just beyond imagination. So to us, it's a reckless, abandoned kind of love that God has for us. To him, it's just his steady, sovereign, never-ending love. So this says that before I spoke a word, everything in our lives was already determined. Before I spoke a word, you were singing over me. You have been so, so good to me. He has, hasn't he? Before I took a breath, you breathed your life in me. You have been so, so kind to me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. When I was your foe, still your love fought for me. 'Cause you have been so, so good to me. When I felt no worth, you paid it all for me. You have been so, so kind to me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. God's love is an abandoned, complete, overwhelming love. He made provision for the Shunammite woman. He made provision for you and me too. He will get us through these things that we are facing. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock and at 10:30, Praise Tabernacle will be live with our services from the church. I'll be preaching, finishing up the book of 2 Corinthians. And between the two services, we have a special kids ministry. So make sure the kids are tuned in for that. And thank you for tuning in today. God loves you. I love you. And he's got a reckless love. It feels that way, doesn't it, for us? Take care.